Go.
Hi, and welcome to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Laura Ehrlich, and our guest today is Chaya Bhuvaneswar. Before I introduce Chaya, thank you all for tuning in, and please chat with us during the interview. Your comments will appear in our broadcast studio, and we'll weave them into our conversation. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is a live conversation that will then be archived as a video and an audio podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. If you enjoy this episode, as always, please also consider becoming a patron or patroness to help keep the podcast going. Now I'm excited to introduce Chaya. Chaya Bhuvaneswar is a practicing physician, writer, and Pan American Award finalist for her debut collection, White Dancing Elephants Stories, which was also selected as the Kirkus Review's Best Debut Fiction and Best Short Story Collection. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Salon, Narrative Magazine, Tin House, Electric Literature, Kenyon Review, The Millions, Joyland, Michigan Quarterly Review, The Owl, and elsewhere. She has received fellowships from MacDowell, Squaw Valley, Community of Writers, and Sewanee Writers Workshop. Chaya has 2 kids, ages 9 and 12, and describes writer motherhood as arduous, irrational, and fun. Now please join me in welcoming Chaya. Hello. Hi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me. It's been a long time coming. You and I first connected. I don't even want to say how long ago now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a large hive of parents who are writers and certainly mothers who are writers. And I really, like Amber Sparks is another person and Jasmine Mendez is another one. And, I feel like we help keep each other going. I really do.
Absolutely. We need this community to keep us afloat, which we'll get to. But let's start, as we usually do, with our 3 words that you've chosen to describe writer motherhood. Tell us about arduous, irrational, and fun.
Well, it's just more work than I could have ever thought. I remember I was finishing a long project right before I gave birth to my first one. And these naive thoughts I have, like, oh, I'll have so much time on my maternity. I mean, they're really funny now. Like, I'll have so much time on my maternity leave. Or, and I thought the biggest problem would be, well, just emotionally, I guess I'll be different, And so I have to write everything down now before the delivery. But I just had no idea at all. And the extent of the cluelessness is a story I tell with my spouse that we came really close to driving away from the hospital with the baby seat put the wrong way. Like we were like it was the wrong way. And then this really kind security guard who knew a lot more than us was like, excuse me. And at first we were like my spouse was like ready to argue with him. And then I was like, wait. And I looked at this paper and I was like, oh, okay. But we were still allowed to drive away with this little beauty. So thank goodness for that. but I mean, I'm staggered. I'm staggered by, I guess I'm staggered by how little you know ahead of time, how little many people know ahead of time. I mean, maybe more so for me because I didn't grow up with extended family around me because most of them are dispersed all over the world. And I didn't see other people having babies next door and I was there, so there was a lot of stuff to figure out.
Yeah. No, I've probably shared this on the podcast before, but I felt the same way. I anticipated having time and time at the hospital too. I was like, there will be 12 hours. I brought the pushcart anthology with me to read during labor.
Oh yeah.
I was like, sure, I'll read this collection of,
You won't be in mortal agony.
Oh my God.
But I feel fortunate that labor was not was very easy the first time, and then the
Mhm.
second time it took longer. But being a physician, I did enjoy that privilege where I told my OB what to do. It was like, now you're going to stop the epidural. Now you're going to, and she was really sensitive, and she did it. And we had a really nice experience sort of working together that way. But it's, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, that it's such an active process. And I think, the notion of invisible labor is something that I've been thinking more about, that there really is so much invisible labor. How do we sort of come to peace with that? Because I don't think the solution is necessarily to trumpet it and like go on long rants about, I did this and it took me so long to do this. And I don't think that's the solution, because everyone has their journey. But at the same time, I think it's important that we can feel the value of what we're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so hard to acknowledge the invisible labor, as you said, and not hold it over people for whom we're doing the labor. But at the same
Right,
time,
or
we want
people who just
recognition.
children. Yeah, just
Yeah.
somehow, because that's also very wrong. Like anyone who's sort of made to feel that they lack something because they are child free.
Mhm.
I'm very much like child free versus childless. I believe in that.
I haven't heard that distinction before, but it's really great. I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit. So you're a physician. Tell us what type of physician you are and a little bit about that work.
So I'm a psychiatrist, and for many years I was a hospital-based psychiatrist, meaning that it was really, side by side with surgeons, internists, treating the sort of treating the behavior and mental changes of many patients who are undergoing different procedures, or who were admitted who really couldn't be cared for anywhere else. And I will say, Twitter has been it's been a journey to really process and hear so many different stories about the mental health experiences of writers on literary Twitter. I've really appreciated it. And although there are many things that I wish were different, um, it struck me as sad today that, for example, the very same people who they post a lot of really negative things about, people being involuntarily hospitalized or committed. Well, there are a lot of shootings like the Brooklyn shooting that we prevented by committing people who were about to do those things,
Yeah.
whose families, and almost always whose families were the ones who brought them to the emergency room and said, these are the texts that I found, or he says he has a bomb somewhere and I don't know where it is and I don't know if it's real, or they've said he's gotten really involved in some very strange things on Facebook and he won't talk to us and he won't come out of his room and he locked himself in the bathroom and he's posting threats of suicide on the web. We're the ones who have been willing to commit people like that. So involuntary treatment just means safety containment. So it's that you can't leave and go set off smoke bombs and shoot people in the subway, but you still get to choose whether or not you take certain kinds of medication. And there's many layers of choice that, if anyone takes that choice away, they have to go and make an argument. They have to go and really show that there's nothing less restrictive. But that's what has sort of also made it really good to take a Twitter break, because I have felt at times like there's such vitriol, against mental health providers, even though, there's a pandemic in our field across the board. There are only 40,000 psychiatrists in the US, very few, very, very few psychiatrists of color, relatively few women of color psychiatrists as well. And yet, you know, there's just so much pain and there's a limited number of places to direct it. And so I do understand, but at the same time, it also made me feel relieved, that we're persevering, and that, like I said, there are literally stabbings killings, shootings that we personally have prevented.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
really
thank you.
wish someone had committed this poor man,
Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for that work.
But I
It
mean,
is
although I'm not doing it anymore,
yeah,
like,
but you know.
yeah, yeah. When the pandemic happened, that shifted how I thought about being in the hospital. And I've written about this, that I realized, like, even throwing all in, like, which we're like, okay, that's great. You guys, you stay home, hunker down, bake your bread. We'll take care of it. Like, none of us were quitting. Hospital, docs, none of us were quitting. We were willing to do extra. Society was still okay with us not having masks, and there was no vaccine. And I don't think I've ever forgotten that. That's the other thing. Like, I don't think I ever will forget that. I mean, there was something so fundamental in the broken trust of that. Like really, our lives were expendable to all of you.
Yeah,
Like, so
yeah.
yeah, so I do outpatient now, where I have a little more control over, like, I see patients either in an office or by telehealth. And if I'm worried that one of us has been exposed or something, I just go straight to telehealth or whatever. And it's not the patients who were, committable. Like, it's not, a patient like poor Mr. I'm forgetting his name. Oh, James, I guess. Poor Mr. James. But I do wonder the whole story as we find it out. I know I have a lot of questions about what was his engagement with the mental health system, and how did this person so clearly slip through cracks.
Yeah. I don't think we've had this perspective on the show before, and I think it's really important and necessary. And I'm wondering, and thank you for putting that horrific event in this context. I think it's important to address that. Tell me a little bit more about, to back up what you had said you were seeing on Twitter that was concerning to you from this frame of reference, specifically about writers, and even more specifically about
Oh,
writer mothers. Like, what do you
there
see
is
us?
just screed.
Yeah,
There is anti-physician hatred. And it's not just on literary Twitter, in the Philippines, and I've written about this too, like for Salon and for the Times. In the Philippines, people threw acid at doctors, thinking you're the ones somehow responsible for the pandemic, even though they're like going to the hospital to try to treat it. In Pakistan, doctors were, having picket lines for at least some of them. Like, they would trade, like some would be in the hospital, some would be out there, just saying, please don't forget about giving us masks. And people have been murdered. And then Lorna Breen, this emergency room physician who gave it all. She gave it all. She even gave her career, because unfortunately, it's thought it's likely because of long COVID, so not necessarily a mental condition she would have had without that. Like, so a lot of what psychiatrists do is sort out the medical underlying causes of different psychiatric conditions, because we're trained in the medicine as well. We have 3 years of medicine training. Like, she had a level of suicidality and depression. So she was inpatient, and she knew she would have to report that to her boards. And that's, I don't know her. I know people who did know her, actually. One of my writing students, in a wonderful catapult course, actually knew her. So talked a lot about this physician. But it sounds like she just thought, now I've really lost it all. Like, I'm going to, lose my standing, and there was kind of nothing left in her mind. And although it was a suicide, I feel like it was really a casualty, not only of the pandemic, but of the cruelty and the disregard for our lives.
yeah,
Just as a social class. And some of it has been erased, and a lot of it has been healed, by, our healthcare heroes. And I mean, I think that all that is great. And I know many colleagues who are really satisfied by that. Like they just said, yeah, we're going to forget about those months without masks and vaccine and just build on the positive. And I totally respect that. But I think more of those colleagues did not also receive the anti-Asian hatred of the time. And, there are these vivid pictures of like Filipino nurses who suffered like probably the highest mortality rate among nurses in the U.S. I think they already were pretty high percentage because of immigration policies in the 60s, 70s, 80s that brought people here, gave people incentives, really because Asian healthcare labor, if you want to call it that, and other foreign medical graduate labor help the country address the shortage caused by the Vietnam War. Like that's what really started the need, the demand. And so there's a vivid photo. I wish I could pull it up, but you could find a Filipino nurse, standing there in his scrubs and like wearing a mask, and anti-mask, anti-vax protesters shouting racial slurs at him. There were racial attacks at one of the hospitals, at one of the Harvard hospitals less than a month ago. So I think that might be why I'm feeling this way, that there is something wrong. There is something hurting, not wrong, hurting, something, and it's not broken either, because I don't believe that. I think things can be healed, but there's a wound somewhere in how the expectations of medical care, mental health care are constructed. And writers are just the ones articulating that, and on Twitter, presenting entirely distorted accounts of various things. So, rants about how somebody's sharps were taken away in an ER. Well, maybe if you've seen a psychiatric patient get hold of somebody else's sharp and slice off her breast, as I have, you will be empathic to the idea that maybe you need to wait a few hours until you're out of the most acute area in order to have your sharps back. Like that's not meant as any kind of personal restriction of you as an individual. That's just about that environment, or the rage that people feel at being hospitalized when they present to emergency rooms with a suicidal plan. Well, on one hand, that is a systems failure because many of them have not been able to get preventive care before they reach that point. But on the other hand, if we really just say, okay, that's fine, go on ahead, what are we really saying? Are we saying as a society that we're not committed to preventing suicide? I mean, what is it? I just sort of feel like, well, what is it that you want from us?
Yeah.
I think sometimes really what it is what they want is, I'm going to make you stop the world for the intensity of my pain and just stop the world. But then when I'm done with that, just pretend this didn't happen and let me go. And that is not sustainable for a system. Like there's not any healthcare system that can really do that. I think the only time when we hopefully can find much less restrictive options, like, is not like just go and let's forget this happened, but more like go because we have someone who can check in on you by phone later tonight. And then there's a place you can come tomorrow morning, after sleeping in your own bed. And I'm all for having more resources like that, but most of them have been cut. A lot of them have been cut. And there are actually very few inpatient beds now. That was the thing. Like, I think I almost lost it. There's this one writer, I don't want to say his name because, he has a powerful voice and he has the intimacy of a first person experience with, being hospitalized. But he writes these screeds about how there should be fewer inpatient beds. And I just feel like screaming. I mean, like, look at deinstitutionalization and these poor people like living on the street, peeing into cups and eating from garbage cans. That's because there are not enough beds. I mean, that's a privilege to be able to say, I don't need beds, I need this. That means you're pretty intact and you're not thinking of all these people who are really just not. They're really impaired. So I don't know. Like there are a lot of things. I mean, I have to now, I think, like I have to find some way of getting what I need to in terms of I love the community, like I love literary community, but it started it started being difficult to see some of these rants. And I
Yeah.
rant too. Everybody rants. I'm not using that word pejoratively at all. We're all allowed to
Yeah.
rant. Rant away. You know? But it's just difficult for me personally to see it. And then I would try to engage. And some people would be like you're saying, like, oh, that's a really interesting perspective. I haven't heard of that. But I think there are many people who are just incredibly invested with making somebody the villain.
Yeah.
But they don't realize, for example, as I learned from, that making your money work segment on The Cut. Have you seen that? As I learned recently, and I myself did not know, um, a 32-year-old brand manager with a BA earns twice as much as a physician with like 3 times the amount of debt and like
Oh,
arguably, a lot more skin in the game. Like, oh yeah,
yeah.
I just stayed up all night and didn't see my kids so that I could do XYZ versus, the things that she was writing in like a lot of people were upset by the cut column because like, yeah, I was having such a good time on the couch. I decided to order a $40 bagel to be delivered to my house. Just like all this kind of, people are like
Oh
very,
my God.
very upsetting, but that's
Yeah.
it too. That's very clear from inside medicine that people are not doing this for the money. And in fact, during the pandemic, the majority of physicians took significant pay cuts. So you're not going to give me masks. You're not going to give me a vaccine. Everybody else is staying home, living it up, who's white collar. There was a big divide there, of course. Living it, everyone with a graduate education, let's say, was having a very different lifestyle, and you're going to cut their pay, and you're not going to forgive their loans. So it's pretty untenable, but at the same time, it is like parenthood in a way because it's arduous, but it's entirely irrational. Because what still continues to inspire me is that the majority of residents still in their training wanted to finish early so that they could go help frontline health workers during COVID. Like they were saying, "Let me join the front line. Let me go
Yeah.
now."
So tell
So
me, I mean, it's inspiring and it's courageous. And I'll say thank you again for even, you said that you're no longer doing that work, but you were
I've
on the
done it
front
for a
line.
while though. Yeah.
Yes, so thank
And
you.
when
Tell
my
me.
kids were the smallest, I think that's the other reason why I hold that emotion about it. I guess on some very visceral level, I'm like, I left my babies for this, and you're
Well,
gonna
so
try to
yeah.
villainize the work.
No, but let's talk about that because before the interview, before this conversation, you and I were chatting a little bit behind the scenes about all of the things and like how sometimes it's hard to put something down. And often the thing that you can put down, because no one will blame you for doing it,
Right.
is the thing that matters to you most, like
That's
a
right.
writing, right? Or
Or
like,
just spending time with your little, like just spending
right.
unstructured, open time. Really, it's so sad, but until the pandemic, when transition there was sort of more room in different professions for transitions, people who would never have wanted to be labeled as opting out. Remember all those articles about like the opting out generation and all these feminists scolding women who were opting out, or and with a relatively narrow conception of who women even were, by the way. Like often those articles did not engage at all with queer or trans communities, so that was already a big problem. But that's the other thing that is really interesting, that a different kind of permission was created for transitions and fluidity rather in careers and identity. I'm hoping that lasts. I really hope it lasts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Tell me a little bit. So I love, again, the perspective you're bringing to our world, to current events, to our world, to issues we're struggling with. In your clinical opinion, what do you think is the biggest issue facing mother writers?
I think it's, a lot of people have written about the quote unquote guilt.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that that is a little sort of more of an artifact of like boomer, generation, and everyone below that is like also mad as hell and too mad to be guilty, and all of that. So that's what I'm hoping. But I think for me, I could, like, just speaking for myself, I actually, and I'm realizing this as we're talking, so I thank you. I'm quite indebted to you as well, like making me think about writer mother monster. Yeah, it is monstrous. That there's this feeling, there's this perception that you can't just sit in a garret and write. Even if you have some of the commercial structures, like my agent is wonderful, I trust her, she knows what I'm working on, she's seen different projects and stages, she sort of has a timeline in her mind that I've created with her. So I feel like, frankly, I feel like almost any cishet male writer I know, and actually quite a few gay white men in particular, um, would just be like, yeah, I'm good. I'm writing now. I've got it all set up. I'm good, and not feel like they still have to hustle, kind of, and like hustle in a way that immediately provides some sort of validation of a writer identity, because I write pieces, freelance pieces, and I get paid, or people are like, oh, I saw that piece in the Times, they're excited. Or like I theoretically think, oh yeah, I'm putting myself on the radar of editors, and you get excited when editors follow you on Twitter and you think it means something, which I'm still to be convinced whether it does. And my editor friends are like, no, it means something, but I think they're just being nice. And like, it's hard to explain, but it's this feeling of not enoughness that's different than guilt. It's definitely like, I feel like my cohort on downward to Gen A, which includes my little 9-year-old, like, I don't think it's guilt as much as this sense of not enoughness and needing external, wins, or like these gigs, and like being able to post something like, I wrote this little thing, and then you have to post something that just ran on the front cover of the LA Times or something, like, and I think that's that's my goal for this academic year, which is how I think about years because of the littles. But that's my goal, like, to really feel like, no, it's more than enough to just be doing my clinical work, that you can tell I care, I care about these patients quite a lot and their families, and do the writing itself and not hustle. But I think it's really, really hard. I think it's really hard. I mean, there's hustle if you are a sole wage earner mother, or co-parenting, and you get a certain amount of alimony, but you have to do the rest. And I think like Meg Pillow and Disha Philia, they've written a lot about this experience, and Maggie Smith, like, they've all written about like single motherhood and co-parenting and income. And that's different. That's a different reason to hustle. But if you have a full-time job and you're just really trying to get the writing done, why also hustle? I have not answered that in a really satisfactory way for myself.
I'm just going to offer solidarity because, as I mentioned before we started talking, by day,
right, right.
Yeah,
no, I'm a day job.
A day job. I'm a director of marketing for a festival that goes on sale next week with 200 plus events. And then with a 6-year-old and trying to write books and do the podcast. And then for some reason, I agreed to write a freelance article where I like went to New York yesterday and interviewed this woman who was amazing. And it's like,
Right. I
why?
mean, all these experiences are good. Like I accepted a freelance assignment, and thank God my editor was, she's been so wonderful. Danielle Amir Jackson at Oxford American. I just want to give her a shout out. People should check out her work and her music issue of Oxford American that she edited. It's brilliant. She is brilliant. And she gave me some extra time because I lost a parent during the researching and writing of this. But on a meta level, why did I go to Nashville again?
Right?
Like, why? Like, why am I doing it? But I did it. And I met the greatest people,
Yep.
So
And that's why, right? It's like the hustle. Well, the
really,
never enoughness is a really
right.
good way of putting it, and it's that, but then it's also the things in some ways that feed your soul, like the
Yes,
pursuing the
actually,
story and this
yeah.
podcast, like it would be so easy and free up so much time to stop doing it. But this, of everything I do, feels like the most vital project. So, but how do
That's what it
you,
is. So
yeah,
I think you've really put your finger on it, because I wonder if, putting aside the not enoughness kind of feeling, there's some interplay between the intellectual stimulation of some of these gig-ish, hustly type of activities, and what happens when you sit down and start writing on the page. But I also really wonder. I mean, Charles Yu is such a lovely, lovely writer, and he's a friend to the theme of parent slash writers, and we are actually part of a growing anthology. And we're all, some of us are also going to present at the Washington Book Festival on this theme of being parents and writers. But I like he talks in a lot of interviews about how he would write after the kids went to bed, and it was such a wonderful thing. But I do think about, but then who went to see what the crying was about, or to respond to the call, that call in the dark, like there'll be a silence, mommy,
mm-hmm, yep,
like there's this like call, and you're like, okay, you wait like 5 seconds and keep your eyes closed, and then like,
yep.
and if it comes again, then you're like, oh, okay.
I know, I know. I've said before, and it's still the case, that my daughter, since like partway through the pandemic, has been sleeping in the bed with us. And
Oh,
eventually it pushed my husband out of the bed. So now it's the two of us in bed.
yeah.
And I
Oh, that makes
can't,
me feel better.
oh my God,
They did so much of that stuff.
so
Oh.
much of that stuff. Yeah. And it's to the point
Where does
where
all the peace come from of like, oh yeah, they're good?
I
I
don't
I
know.
believe that, not any specific person, but I have suspicions that people who have a lot of quiet and peace are doing something chemical.
I think
Those
so.
kids, something. They're
I
doing
think
something.
so. If I leave the bed, even to go to the bathroom,
Feels
she
it.
wakes up.
Feel
She's like,
it.
Mom, Mama, where'd you go? And so I can't like write at night because
Right.
I have to
Oh.
like hold her
Did they
just
learn to
so.
get up when you get up?
Yes.
Jasmine is very lucky. She's so wonderful, and she has, Jasmine Mendez has all these books coming out, bilingual books, and she's a poet, a playwright, a writer, and she does this 5 a.m. writers club on Twitter. But actually, for mine, it would have to be the 4 a.m. writers club of hiding in the basement, and even then, they will find you.
Yes. I know. I know. I don't know. I don't know.
But I feel like we're kind of humble bragging too,
Mhm.
because I know I am, because I wasn't sure I would take to motherhood in quite this way. Like, I just didn't know what to expect. I just thought, what if they just don't, what if they're just like these blasé, the movie Kids, like that old movie.
Mhm.
I was like, what if they're like those kids? Like, and they're just like, we have no time for you. But it is a that's the why I said fun, in my 3 words,
Mhm.
because it is incredibly fun. It's really, really fun. They're
It
very
really is.
Yeah, they're very fun.
How has motherhood changed your writing?
Oh, I mean, I've written about this. I wrote about this a little for the Story Prize blog. Um, it definitely helped me get to the point, become efficient. I think in the beginning there was such a forward thrust. Like some of my friends would read it and are like, I can't believe how you put on the gas. Like it's just really propulsive and sometimes successfully, sometimes like, one friend was like, you need to slow the way down here, like just slow down. But there is that sense of I don't know how much time I have, I don't know how much time I have. And I think much less judgmental about what counts as writing. So looking at old stuff and even just rereading it or making notes on it or revising it, I count all of that. I'm not like counting towards some minimum. I'm just really happy for whatever I get every day. And then I think Lydia Kiesling, I love what she's written about this theme of writing and motherhood. I think she's really right about the importance of either planned or unplanned solo time. So that's the thing, like with some of these freelance gigs where I have to go somewhere, and there haven't been very many really. But with Nashville, I had like days in Nashville by myself writing that I wouldn't have had otherwise. It was my little 2-day writing retreat. And the same thing with like Sewanee Writers Conference. I know people must have thought I was so weird because Sewanee is, even though like it's a new, young, wonderful female conference director now, and she took over the reins in a very graceful way. And she's brought a lot of faculty of color, a lot of women faculty, a lot of queer and non-binary faculty. There's still this like clubby, insidery kind of feel to it. And then these rituals people do with each other that involve, outdoor swimming and drinking and hanging out and playing the guitar and just kind of hanging out. I did not care. Like, I was like, I'm here for one reason. Like, go to seminar. And then I would come back to my room. I had like granola and juice boxes in my room. And I was like willing to live on it. And I wrote several things. Like I actually got stuff done, so getting stuff done, I think, is the most challenging thing. That's what's changed. Like I feel like motherhood really forces you to get intentional. Like, okay, now I'm going to finish. And I don't know if I feel like I would be too distracted, frankly, by bugs, but Lydia's description, I think she wrote it in the Atlantic, or I forget where she wrote it, but of going and renting a very cheap cabin for a couple of nights and eating terrible food out of vending machines and like just kind of living raw, just like writing. I could do that, but at a luxury hotel, perhaps. Like, not
So I have to say, I sort of do the middle ground, and I found it to be the most productive and helpful thing where I rent like an Airbnb for 2 nights, and it's
exactly.
just me.
Something.
Yeah, and I will like, yeah, eat whatever is down the street, even if it's like from Walgreens. I'll like,
Right, or just like go to Walgreens and they do have eggs there. People are like, how can you? There was a very sweet Twitter thread. People were like, whoever heard of real food at CVS? I'm like, I have found graham crackers there.
Pharmacy eggs. There you go.
It's all really bad, but yeah, I mean, but I would say the other way that motherhood has changed my writing is there was this really beautiful story that Juliana Baggett told at a conference about how she became more accepting of ideas coming at inconvenient times. So like when she's cutting up apples for one of her kids, I think she has like a lot too. Like I think she has more than two. I don't know like the exact number, less than 10, more than two. She like if some really good idea comes, she takes it. Like it counts. Because I think before becoming a mother, there'd be moments of ideas or breakthroughs or insights, and I would take it for granted that, oh, I'll do that when I'm sitting at my desk. like I'm cool, I'm good. Come later, muse, like, and I don't do that anymore. Like when it comes, just like really try to keep it or do something with it, write it down, write it on my phone, record it into my phone, just like do something. And same for reading time. Like I do a lot of I recently I got hooked on books on tape talking about writer mothers, listening to all of Louise Erdreich's beautiful novel The Sentence, which is also a lot about motherhood, in terms of people trying and failing and trying again to form mother child bonds,
Mhm.
and all amid all these obstacles of structural racism, genocide, um so I think like it is good for how you utilize time, but I think because there's this other thing by which you mark time, your child's development, sometimes it can feel like you're really out of step with like the publishing world's conception of time.
Hmm.
Like where, like I remember somebody said to me after my New York Times piece came out, this is great, but now you have to sell your memoir proposal in 6 months. And I was sort of gaping like, what? Like what? And then I like I had these heart to hearts with my agent, and I just said, I'll just write the whole thing. Like just forget, like I was like, can I get out of having to do it now if I write the whole thing? And she was delighted. She was like, sure, like if you have a whole manuscript, great. But yeah, I mean, I wonder if have you ever thought about that? Like just the way that, because it's sort of like I feel like writers without children, whether they're married or not, or whether they're partnered or not, because I actually think it's a bigger divide to choose to not have children, or maybe have the decision forced on you. So variable. It's a bigger divide than being married or unmarried. I really feel, maybe wrongly, but I feel like they have a way to prioritize and be obedient to these different kinds of timelines, and like they sort of glamorize, I put everything aside and I just worked on this. And I don't know what that would be like now.
Yeah. I do think about that, although I hadn't thought about it in terms of the timelines and how they're kind of mismatched. But you're right. I was thinking, well, actually, do you ever experience this where you're taken by surprise by things within the realm of motherhood where, like, I feel like at work I have to be on top of things, and in writing I
Right.
have my schedule, and, like, I don't always adhere to it, but I know what
Right.
I need to do and what I want to do. But I'm constantly taken by surprise by the fact that, like, for example, my daughter has spring break next week, and I had no idea until yesterday. And, like, and so her timeline is a constant surprise to me where I'm like, "Wait, now I have to figure out, like, how to do my job when he's
That came
home."
earlier.
Yeah.
She's 6, right?
She's 5.5, yeah.
5.5. Yeah. I mean, I think until the older one was 7, I still was operating at the level of which way do you put this car seat again?
Yes.
Like, I still had to relearn. Like I would do things competently, but I was like thinking and wondering, like each
Yes,
time,
yes.
and worried, and like the first time, like I think I heard him curse. That was a big deal. I was like calling people, like, is this okay?
Yeah.
Calling my child psychiatrist friends, is this really okay? And they would like laugh and hang up, like, um, but I do think it does kind of get easier. But I think what actually gets easier is your level of acceptance. Now I sound
Mm,
very shrinky, but it is true. Like your level of this sort of radical acceptance of, here you are and this little person, and you've really said to this little person, whatever you do is okay.
hmm.
Really, whatever you do is okay. Like, You could, we're all flawed, and like I've had these very existential conversations with my 12-year-old, which I find delightful. I'm like, well, why do you think you did that to your sister? Well, the truth is, when I see her react that way and get upset, sometimes it gives me glee. like, and then he's like, okay, maybe that makes me a bad person. I'm like, no, that's not the point. The point is more, is it prudent? Like you have all these kind of very deep, and I don't know what that does for us as writers, but I know what it does for us as humans. And the alternative seems quite bleak to me, like to just not have that kind of connection. But I also think that's probably more true for people who wanted children most of their adult lives. Like I think if the desire just wasn't there, I really applaud people who don't do it just to go through the motions.
Tell me more about that, because I thought I never wanted children.
Oh, really?
Until I was about 34,
Does your
35.
daughter watch? No.
Yeah, no. And I was like, so you're talking about me. And I'm like, and then I was like, well, if I'm going to have a child, it's now or never. And after a lot of conversation
anymore, by the way, but anyway,
it's not true anymore. Well, it was kind of like, I want to do it now. Right. So it was like, I would want to do it now. And so after a lot of conversation with my therapist, I was like, okay, well, there's never like the right time to have children. And
well, there's never, if you conceive of right as the time when you have everything managed and everything predictable, then yes. But there's no right time. But I do think there is a better versus harder time in terms of like it would have been really hard to have a child during my intern year of residency, for example, but that's, I do get what you mean. But what do you think tipped you to say, okay, I'm going to do it? That's what's so interesting.
Yeah. So hopefully she's not watching, but my own mother sacrificed a lot to become a mother, a lot of her own desires and needs and wants. And I was terribly afraid that to become a mother would mean that I couldn't also then be a writer. And
oh, I thought that too.
You thought that too. And so
that's a load of hogwash.
It totally is. But there's so few, or there were very few examples of women who were doing both at the time. But I'm interested in what you were saying about women who didn't know for their adult lives that they wanted motherhood, and how that might be different from somebody who knew their whole adult lives that they did. So which one are you?
I guess I just meant that I'm always trying really hard not to assume that what I find completes the meaning of my life and is so important to me is also that important. Like I really reject the idea of any kind of biological destiny of anybody, like, so that's really what I meant. That I was when I was saying, wow, the alternative would be so bleak, what I really wanted to do was write a big for me, like for me, it would have been so bleak because I really wanted to create family as sanctuary. And I would say sometimes I'm really, really cheesy and sentimental. Like, in addition to having, like talking about my little 12-year-old's glee in doing naughty things, I occasionally will watch these terrible dating reality shows, with like Vanessa and Nick Lakey. And it's also kind of interesting to see, this very specific Americanized form of intercultural, interracial marriage, and what does it mean? And, like she does talk about her Filipina identity, but then what did it mean to him? And what does it mean that somebody who I think of as quote unquote so white like accepted her that way. It's sort of like a Bridgerton, like Kate and Anthony kind of question, like, what does that mean? Like, what does this mean about everything I know about the history of us? Like what has happened? But I think, like, I oh gosh, now I've really lost the thread. I'm like really distracted by reality shows. Oh yeah, but but I like she it's actually kind of moving. So I'll be real. Like, so apparently her mother, Vanessa Lakey's mother, left her family when she was 6 or 7 years old. Like, she left her in the care of her white Italian American father, who then remarried and raised her basically. And the mother came back only once when Vanessa won Miss Teen USA to ask for money. And Vanessa gave her the winnings from the pageant, and the mother left again. But out of that story, she's written this very, very, very cheesy. I don't know if I should make this a book recommendation, but there's something about it that hooks my heart, where she's, for every season and major holiday of the year, meaning just holiday for which most people have off from work, like, or either have off from work or kids are doing something like Halloween, like that sort of, she's created some sort of family ritual, because she said, I realized there was nothing my mother passed on to me because I just didn't have her long enough.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't aware of her enough when I did have her. So I made a point of saying, okay, I'm going to start this then. Like, I can either lament not having her, or I can sort of start the clock from me. And there was enough sorrow and really misery in many parts of my family where I really felt that I get to start the clock with me. And that's really why I can't imagine not, but at the same time, I could see someone who didn't really feel like they needed to start any clocks, just saying, I am enough and I don't need to have a child to validate me or my existence. And that's what I'm talking about. I really celebrate that.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I love that. And I just, the whole arc of everything you articulated right there was
Especially the
beautiful.
reality shows. You have to see The Ultimatum. That is the winner for just absurdity and amusement.
I will watch Ultimatum, but I was still totally hooked by your reference to Kate and Anthony, because I just
yes.
love
Oh my
Bridgerton.
God.
And I was like, yeah, I love Bridgerton. I've been trying to get Julia Quinn on the show. Julia Quinn, if you're out there listening, please come on the show. But back to you. Maybe you could read us out with some of your work, and I'll solo you, and then I'll bring you back on with me so that we can close out.
Great. Yeah, I'll read just the first page of my story collection from the title story. So, hello everybody. So this is from the story White Dancing Elephants. And it is a story about motherhood, kind of inspired actually by the motherhood story of the Buddha, except this is a contemporary heroine in London. So White Dancing Elephants. I walk out to the lobby, wanting to prolong my dream of you, thinking that I'll gain some control by staying awake. Impossible. I'm too aware that people are staring at me. The lobby is tiny, compact, but cool as glass. I walk with my hands loose, hair disheveled, my pajamas covered by a trench coat. Someone glides out from behind a front desk and presses an umbrella on me because it's pouring. The rain is tropical. It's June in central London, financial district, the back of Deutsche Bank, the first building I walk past, with its gargoyles and angelic flourishes, so unlike its German-constructed, super-efficient front facade. I'm half a block away from the hotel when, shivering, I open my umbrella. The rain makes it possible to wipe my face and have people think that I was caught in a downpour. I hate metaphors of rain, fecundity, gushing water from a hidden space. There wasn't anything macabre in your passing, no rush of blood, no horrifying trickle down my legs. Just two clear stains, understated, as quiet and undemanding as your whole life had been, only enough blood for me to know. When I was younger, in my early 20s, and couldn't imagine having a child, I would stare at myself as I jogged past office buildings, appreciating the slim reflection and promising myself to stay that way. Now I don't look. The curve of my belly is meaningless, indulgence, fat, no longer where I'm carrying you. But all the signs are still there, superfluous. The fuller breasts, not tender anymore. Young skin, shiny hair, that were all gifts from you. You all right then, love? A cabby leans out his window when I stop for the light, and he sees my tearful face. I nod, then make an unintended turn and keep walking. Without realizing it, I've reached a subterranean sort of Euro mall here. Octagon Arcade, it's called, though looking at the glossy bus shelter type of walls gives me too much of a headache to bother counting to see if they're really 8. Things are never named reliably, I understand. Boots is not a shop in England where shoes are sold. Monsoon has nothing to do with India. W.H. Smith isn't a person, but a generic chain of newsstands selling cheap sandwiches and tabloid rags and things called health foods like Tiger Balm, which isn't made from tigers at all. If we were only in the forest together, we wouldn't sleep. We would stay up. You would nestle against my breast, picking it up and stroking it and arranging it under your ear like a pillow. And eventually you would say, Mama, though not right away. Before you could speak, you would make sounds. And because the sounds would tell me you were listening, I would kiss your head and tell you stories. Stories within stories. Stories of elephants in the forest. Stories of tigers. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much for having me.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. And this was just such an important and thoughtful and generous conversation. Thank you so much for
I
joining us.
really enjoyed it. Thank you, Laura. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you
A
so
hug from
much.
me. Bye-bye.
Bye. And thank you all for joining us tonight as well. If you enjoyed the episode and the conversation as much as I did, please consider becoming a patron or patroness of the podcast to help keep it running. You can find more information at writermothermonster.com under the support tab. And as always, thank you, and I will see you next week. Bye, everybody.